Hello, everyone. My name is Diane Crilly. We welcome you to our first leadership series for 2022. These events are sponsored by Craig Kelman and Associates. We appreciate the continued support Kelman offers to these events. As we enter into in-person events, the new Next Plan, Preparing, and Future-Proof Your Event Strategy is important as we look at applying design thinking principles to create meaningful and impactful events. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. I would like to introduce WEF staff, Stephanie Jones. Stephanie has been with WEF for many years, and she is the Managing Director of Professional Development and Event Strategy. Stephanie brings a wealth of knowledge in all things related to conferences, and her connection with professionals in this field offers us the ability to have guest speaker Beth Sermont of 360 Live Media with us here today. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Diane. So as Diane said, welcome to our session today. This session is intended to be very interactive, and it uses a rapid fire format to discuss the changes we're seeing in conferences and trade shows, attendee expectations, and event design. Our facilitator, as Diane said, is Beth Sermont, and I've known Beth for several years. She and I serve on the ASAE Meetings and Expositions Section Council, and for as long as I've known Beth, she has been obsessed with events. She has more than 20 years experience in corporate and nonprofit events and trade shows. And as Diane said, she's currently the Vice President of Event Strategy and Design at 360 Live Media. She is a thought leader in this industry, and she's very influential in designing what the next era of events will be. So I am now going to turn this over to Beth. We are so appreciative that Beth is giving us this time, and I think you will enjoy the session and find it very enlightening. So Beth, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And it's an honor, really, to be asked by Stephanie to speak with you all today. I admire Stephanie and her work, and it's been great to be a colleague of hers for several years now. So when she asked if I would do this, I said yes without hesitation. Going to give you a little bit of background about how today is going to work and just a touch about who I am. And then we'll dive right into the presentation. So let me just move the slides there, and here we go. Okay, so as Stephanie said, my name is Beth. I like books, bourbon, and dogs. And why you should care about what I have to say today, as she mentioned, I do have 20 years, more than 20 years of professional experience, both behind the reg desk as well as designing events. 9 of those years have been in the virtual space as well. I was doing virtual before virtual was cool. As she mentioned, I have both corporate and association experience, and I've also launched more than 30 events in my career. So I have a really deep knowledge of what it takes to enhance and improve and invent events. And as she mentioned, I am truly obsessed with events. I do go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning thinking about events. It's a little scary. But what I hope to accomplish here with you all today is to scare you just a little bit, but then reassure you. And ultimately open you up to new ways of thinking. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. And just a real quick background on who 360 is, if you've never heard of us. 360 Live Media, we've worked with more than 100 organizations in the 11 years we've been around. We do strategy, design, and marketing for primarily associations, some corporate as well. We have a data and audience-centered approach, and your mission is our mission. So we're here to help with anything that anyone may need. Today's session is going to use a topic tournament format, which is one of my very favorite formats. Please feel free to take a screenshot of this because this is a format that you can steal for your own events. So this is going to run just like this. So we're in the intro right now, giving you, just a little bit of background. Then I'm going to go into 3 topics. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes going over these 3 topics. That's going to move pretty quickly. So if you're multitasking, that's the time you want to pay attention. Then we're going to have about 5 minutes just for you all to share, if something pops up top of mind or you're inspired by something, and you're going to vote on which topic you want me to go deeper on. And then we'll spend the remainder of the time talking on that winning topic, and we'll have a little bit of time left over for Q&A. Does that sound good to everyone? All right. Okay, so buckle up because here we go with the fast part. So we're going to start by talking about current trends that we're seeing across the space. The first is business travel being reduced. So most experts say 20 to 30% permanent reduction in business travel going forward. And this is due to both reduced budgets, but also just a shift in priorities and substituting new ways of doing business. We no longer have to get on a plane the way that we used to do things. Now, 20% of business travel is conference attendance. So if you think about that, that could have a lot of implications for the future attendance at our events. There's also something new coming into play with carbon capture and carbon budgets with events. Now, along with that is this idea that at-home consumption is king. And we are in this pendulum swing right now, right? Where, we were cooped up and now everybody can't wait to get out. But we're going to see that return to, a level set pretty soon, probably by the end of this year. People in general are lazy. And, since the pandemic, we can get brand new movies, we can get groceries, we can even get doctor's appointments, all without leaving the house. Now, what that means for us who have events is not only is it harder to get them there, but if we have a digital strategy, they may choose that over being in person. And along with that, the expectations for being in person, they're higher than they have ever been. I've been to many events since June of last year. I think I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 now. And I have to tell you, it scares me a little bit because most of the ones that I go to are really just in-person Zoom meetings. When we put in the investment and the time and the money and the risk to actually get on a plane and go to an event, if it doesn't feel different than what I could get at home, that's not going to be good for attendees returning to events. Now, one of the ways that we can counteract that is this idea of transformation over transaction. Now, this is a consumer trend that we're starting to see come into the event design space. And what it means is people want to be different because they've interacted with you in some way, shape, or form, particularly if they've come to something in person. They no longer just want to give you their money and show up and get the content and then leave. They expect to feel like they have some sort of impact, that they're part of something bigger, and that they've been changed in some way by participating in your event. Now, one other trend that has really popped up a lot in the past 3 or 4 months is this idea that your brand needs to take a stand. And I share it with you here today because it does have implications for events. Previously, events and particularly nonprofit associations, we were just politically neutral, right? We didn't necessarily comment on what was going on in the world. The expectations, however, now is that if I'm participating with you in some way, shape, or form, I'm expecting that you might reflect my personal values. And so I want to know what your values are. Now, that has implications for us who have events, in controversial places or maybe in, speakers that are coming to our stage. So it's things that we need to think about. Now, that's the first chunk of information. And what I'm going to do now is just give you a few minutes to process this, right? Because I just threw a lot of things at you. This is not the Q&A time. We'll have time for that later. But I'd like you to just take a moment here to think through these 3 questions. So of what I just shared for you, and we're going to do this at the end of each section, what was your big takeaway? What is something that you heard that maybe could affect your event? And then, if you're talking to somebody else after this presentation, what might you tell them about what I just told you? This is personal. I'm not going to ask you to share it out, but just want to give you a moment to reflect on what you just heard. So I'll be quiet for that. All right, so now moving into new strategies. So how do we deal with these trends that we were just talking about? So the first is you have to look at risk and measure risk differently and more frequently than you have before. Events have always been risky, but now we have higher perception of what risk means. as well as just more things happening, right? More variants, more climate crises. We're going to continue to have disruptions to our events. Now, risk means something different for every organization and every event. It's not one size fits all. So you have to spend some time thinking about, the different factors that affect your event, and not only the impact on your audience, but also the impact of your audience on your local community that you're going to. Also, another strategy is to be asking, so what, with like everything that you're hearing. So, everything that I just talked about, and then, how we pause to think about how it affects you. That's how you should be consuming information right now. You always want to read things or listen to things through this lens of, so what? So what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my event? What does that mean for my organization? And at the same time, you have to understand the so what of your event. It's really important that we understand why we're holding events. And if it's just to generate revenue, that's not a good enough reason anymore. Now, along with that, we want to measure the success of the event. And we're going to have to measure it differently, because we've traditionally measured event success by how many people come and how much money we bring in. But if we know now that we might be getting fewer attendees, what are the other ways that you can think about that you will measure success? It might be a net promoter score. How many people would recommend your event to a friend or colleague? It might be how many people convert to membership after being at your event. It might be the number of quality buyers that you bring for your exhibitors. So different ways to measure success. Now, along with all of this, another strategy to be thinking about is upping your resources. And this is a really tough topic to talk about right now, where we're all struggling for more budget and more staff and more volunteers and more time to get things done. But the message I'd like you to take away from this is that as you are planning to go forward, your event and your models are going to be different than they were in 2019. So you can't just be making assumptions and restaffing for the models that you had before. You have to think about what is the direction that you want to go in. Now, something that will help you with that is the data you have available to you. One of the silver linings of all those virtual events that we conducted is that we now have a ton of data on our audiences. So you should be able to go in and see what were the most popular sessions. How long did people watch them? Did they consume them live or on demand? On demand, what time of day? You might even have some good information, in your questions section or in your comments section. So you should have a lot of things that you can use as you think about bringing your events forward into the future. And so again, I'm going to pause just for a moment here for you to do some self-reflection on what you just heard about the new strategies. What's an aha that you heard? How could this affect you? What's the so what? And what would you tell someone about this after this presentation? We'll just take a moment and then we'll go into the third section. All right, so moving into the third section, changing audience behaviors. This is one of my favorite things to study and to talk about. Now, something that has struck me a lot about this time in the post-pandemic world is that we are all different. We're different in ways we don't even realize that we're different. This quote really resonated with me. Even our sense of how we perceive time is different than it used to be. And so the point is that no one is the same as we were before. We may not even fully realize that. So we can't just go back to how things were and expect that they're going to run in the same way and that our audience is going to respond in the same way. This is one of my favorite charts. We took some things that you consume and just sort of tracked how they've changed, over the past 100 years, right? So if we think about news, right, just here at the top of the list, I'm sure some of you on this call, I can remember getting a physical newspaper, printed out newspaper to my house. We still get it, actually, and then today that's changed drastically, right? From, online news to webs to apps dedicated, directly to news. Now, there's two things I want you to take away from this chart. The first is that Gen X, my generation, there's a time right now where we're all moving into leadership, and we see both sides of the way things were and the way things are now. And so there's a little bit more openness to change than there used to be. The other thing is that scary black line at the bottom there, which is in 100 years, the model for conferences really hasn't changed at all. Particularly in the scientific space, we still run conferences the way that we used to. So what do we do with that? We have to think about how we're going to get people to come. And this is what we focus on. We call it the 10 hurdles. So these are all the things you have to overcome to get someone to come to your event. So first of all, they have to be aware of it. They have to care about it. They have to think it's relevant to them, that the content is applicable. And they have to think it's better than any of the alternatives that they could go to. And that's just the first sort of like basic level that you have to clear. And the next level, it's all about the logistics, right? The date has to work for them. The location has to work for them, whether that's in person or it's online. The pricing has to be good for them. They have to consider that it's a good value for the money that they spend. And then usually you need some type of draw to get them there. What's the one thing that's really going to get them excited to come? Now, even with all of that, we still have these last two hurdles to clear, which are the hardest, right? The first is the shift in priorities. It's hard to leave my house, leave my family, leave my dog, get childcare. And even if I clear all those hurdles, there's still approval at the top. Even if I want to go, I still may not be able to go because my boss may not let me. So the way that we overcome this is we have to build for what the customer needs. This is product development thinking. So even if they don't know what that is, right? I'm sure many of you are familiar with the quote that's attributed to Henry Ford. The idea that if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would say a faster horse. So what we want to make sure we're doing as we come back is not building faster horses. And we do that by always asking ourselves, why would someone get on a plane to come to my event? And to help us with that, we use what we call the value equation. So value is quality over price, or what you get and what you pay for it. And so when we're working with clients, we actually build this out to try to understand what it is people want. And so if we look at the denominator, this is pretty similar across all events. In the digital space, it's really just the cost of the registration fee and the time spent. I could have done, something else. Basically, I log onto my computer, I get what I want, and I close it and I walk away. In the in-person space, there's a whole lot of other things to overcome, and those are even perceived as higher cost than they used to be. So when we're thinking about, why would someone come in person and why would someone come digitally, we want to make sure we understand what they really want. And you can see on the slide that was just up there, when people are coming for digital, they're typically looking for content. When they're coming in person, at least right now, they're typically looking for connection. And so that's the third of our three topics here. And again, I'm just going to give you a moment to digest that, write a couple notes down, and then I'll take the slides down and we'll see if anyone has any comments or anything that they'd like to share. Okay, so I'm going to take the slides down. And again, this is optional. If anybody wants to say anything, I would invite you to go ahead and come off of mute. But you can also put Selena into the chat. So, does anybody want to share like an aha or something that jumped out to them or something that resonated with them? Oh, thank you. I can tell you, I can answer that question. So the Q is quality and the P is price. So quality over price. Cool.
Beth, I'll share. For me, what was very enlightening, the barriers, the 10 barriers, and how we really need to address those in our design and also in our marketing and messaging. So that was a big aha moment for me. So, and something I'm taking away from this session.
What's really interesting is that we've always measured those barriers, but post-pandemic, the order has changed. Approval and priorities used to be much lower on the list, and now they're at the top. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Pamela. Yes, definitely. That's why we want to think about new strategies. I'll give it just another second here. And it's okay if you don't have anything to share. Cool. So Diane, why don't we go ahead and pop up that poll?
Great. Okay.
Oh, great.
Gonna launch it.
So I'll answer to Jane's question here, or Jane's comment while we're here. But while I'm doing that, so what you're going to do now is vote on which one of these topics you want me to go deeper on. I'll let you know there's a little bit of overlap between them. So just go ahead and keep voting. And Jane, to your point, it surprised me as well. And actually, the deeper that we dig into it, the more interesting that it becomes. And yes, very good point to the socialize at in-person events as well. I think right now what we're seeing is that when people are coming back, like all they want to do is talk to each other, and that's part of that, like don't have an in-person Zoom meeting. Actually, what works really well at in-person events right now, instead of one-way content like speaker or panel on a stage, it's creating like problem-solving opportunities. It's a different type of socializing. But yeah, it's really interesting to find all these different things. Let's see here. So it looks like new strategies might be the winner here. We can go ahead and share the results. So new strategies is what we'll dive into a little bit further. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. Okay, so let me pop back into here. And new strategies was our winner. Okay, so again, these are the strategies to think about to deal with all these trends and changes as well. And something that is important to note is that we're not at the end of this. We're kind of like right in the middle of it, right? So we're just actually kind of at the beginning of what the new world is going to look like in terms of events. And so, everything is still sort of in flux and changing a little bit. But let's start by talking about that risk calibration. And this is another screenshot moment if you're interested in that. So when we talk about how to calibrate risk, and I mentioned it's different for every organization. This is something that a very simplified version of something that we develop for our clients. And it's this idea that you have to look at multiple factors, right, when you're trying to understand the risk of your event. And so, looking at, and this is specific to COVID, but it can be expanded to think about other things, what's sort of the current state of the world, right? And, so, we have a client right now who's going to have an event in Atlanta in June. And, we help them look at, the different hospital capacity that's available. We help them look at, the vaccination rates of the local community, because you also want to think about, you're bringing your event into an area. Are you putting the community at risk? And Atlanta does have a community that doesn't have the same kinds of access as other places do to good health care. So it's a lot of things to think about, with that, but it doesn't stop there, right? It's next level is thinking about how much control do you have over the safety of the event? Can you put things outside? Are masks required? Are you allowed to make them required? What's the sort of just general perception and audience sentiment? Do people feel like they're safe? The perception of safety is just as important as actual safety measures. That was one of the interesting things that came out in some of that research, Jane, that we were sort of chatting about before. During the time, people wanted to see things being cleaned, even though people knew it didn't have necessarily anything to do with the way that COVID was spread. The actual seeing of things being cleaned helped with their safety perception. So another one of those, interesting psychological things. Now, when we think about calculating risk, and this would be like if you were going to, let's say, cancel the event or move the event, you definitely want to think about your image and your reputation. And what's interesting about this in terms of how it's different for every organization, whether you decide to go forward or whether you decide to cancel could have positive or negative implications depending on, the majority of your attendees and your audience base. So that also plays back to that your brand taking a stand idea. Then, of course, we have this idea of substitutability. So many of us haven't had an event in person for 2 years. If we don't have an event this year for some reason and someone else does that mean we might lose our audience to that event? And then, of course, thinking about the impact on our own resources, cancellation fees, and all those types of things. So the takeaway from this is that you really want to think about how to calculate risk in a number of different ways. And then so we talked a little bit about the so what, right? And so what we recommend for this is, again, as you read and as you learn things from people, that you actually spend some time going through case studies. These are examples that are on our website, but I feel like people put out case studies all the time. But you want to spend some time with your team actually thinking about, how does that impact you? And something that we recommend and that we actually do ourselves is to have so what sessions once a quarter. And these can actually be kind of fun. You invite your team together who's working on the event. You pick a situation, what if a hurricane were to hit, or this thing is happening in the world? And you kind of talk it through as a team to say, okay, so what would that mean for us? What would the implications be? How would we handle that? It's something that is, you know, a little bit of a team building experience. It's something that can be a little bit of a bonding thing. But it also really helps you because, you know, you get sort of a mental pathway started for how you'll deal with those issues going forward. Now, thinking like a product developer, I think, is a lot of fun. You know, again, this idea for building what the customer wants, even if they don't know what it is that they need. And when we think about product development and thinking about, you know, the event as a product, one of the things that we like to do is to look at who does product development really, really well, right? And so Apple is a great example of that. And, you know, how do they develop products? Well, they do it with a couple of different things. So first they have, you know, the surveys that they send out. They also pay a lot of attention to customer feedback, you know, the troubleshooting issues that come in and any kind of ratings that come in. They also spend a lot of time, you know, looking at their data, understanding what it is that might be driving things forward. And they also pay attention to what their competitors are doing. This is something that we sometimes overlook in the event space, but it's important to know what the other events are doing that, you know, maybe you could take away from your event. And then finally, this idea that, you know, the Apple design is designed to remove all of the friction from the process. You know, I remember when the phones, you know, had buttons at the bottom and things like that. Now they don't even have buttons anymore. I just heard this great quote about how, you know, there's no buttons in nature. So again, thinking about, you know, at every single step, how can I make this easier for my attendees? How can I make it something that they really are comfortable using? And really, you want to get them to the point where they're not even thinking about, you know, coming to your event because, you know, everything just feels very seamless to them. Now, the way that you get there is by, you know, researching and using the data and looking at the competitors like we talked about before. But sort of like the magic secret here is talking to your audience. And when we say talk, I mean actually like interviewing them. And you can do this in a couple of different ways. You know, pick 5 people that come to your event on a fairly regular basis and set up 5 30-minute phone calls with them and ask them questions about the event and ask them what they like. Now, the secret here is that you want to always try to keep things positive. So you don't want to ask them what they don't like about it. You want to ask them, you know, what are things that you like that you would like to see more of? Or what are things you've experienced in other places? Or even just like, what are you interested in right now? What topics are you curious about? Those little 30-minute conversations, they aren't going to be like a huge qualitative research project, but they're going to give you a lot of directional information that's going to help you understand how you can start to build that transformative experience. And, you know, it all comes back to this quote. And I think, you know, the Microsoft CEOs, he said it the best. It's, you know, when you put humans at the center, you always make the right decisions. And I know in my career, I'm guilty of this as an event planner. You know, we're just trying to make the event happen sometimes, right? And so we're thinking more about like, how do I feed all these people? And how do I move all these people from one place to the other? And are there enough coffee cups? As opposed to, you know, what is it that people really want and really need? And not getting, you know, completely caught up in the details, but trying to really design something that feels more like a very welcoming experience. And this kind of goes along with this idea of, you know, a 365 access to an event. And I know year-round content or 365 or however. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, no worries. So this idea that, you know, people are talking a lot about now, 365, you know, putting content out in different ways. And, you know, we look at it with, you know, centered around the event. How are we promoting things around the event? But what we really want to think about is that the event is part of this 365-day cycle with the audience at the center, right? We're trying to focus everything on the audience and what the audience needs. Now, this idea of purpose-driven work is really interesting. And it's this idea that our events can be so much more than just a regular gathering of people. And it gets into this transformation over transaction idea. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You know, the base needs at the bottom, the food and shelter. And until you have your base needs satisfied, you can't progress, you know, to these other higher levels of being. And we can map that to attendees as well. And this is one of my favorite things to think about when I'm designing. You know, we start our events with, what's the base needs for the job or the base needs for the event. They need a chair to sit in. They need this basic content to understand, how to go forward. And sometimes we stop there, right? But if we really want to build these more transformative experiences, we have to think about all the other levels here. So comfort in contributing, do they feel comfortable asking a question? Is there a way that we can make people feel safe in sharing comments or having peer-to-peer conversations? Again, I think it was Jane's point earlier, people want to socialize, right? So how are we creating opportunities for that? The next level is, do they feel accepted in the community? Is there a community? Do they feel like they're part of something larger, part of something that's bigger than just them? Then we have the respect and recognition level. A lot of times this lines up to the awards program. And what's so, again, interesting about this is it's not just about, can I win an award or can I be recognized? It's just as much, am I seeing my peers being recognized? So there's a dual benefit to that. And then after you've cleared all of those levels, that's where we can get into outcomes and solving issues and really moving the industry forward. So imagine centering your event around a problem. You hit all these other boxes, and then here at the top, now we can start to talk about, what this problem or what this issue might be. And another way to think about it, or another way to illustrate this is, you've got the person who's going to the event, and they are looking for three things. They're looking for the knowledge, the education, the credits. Maybe it's business intelligence. Maybe they want to learn about trends, but they're looking for that knowledge that they need. They're looking for connection. They want to meet peers. Maybe they want to sell things. Maybe they just want to, build a community themselves. And they're also looking to make impact, right? They want to drive something forward. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And, a lot of our events, we do really well with the knowledge and the connection, but we're missing the impact part. And so as we think about how can we differentiate our events going forward from our competitors or from what we used to be, that impact and that larger sort of piece of affecting the bigger community, that's a great place to spend some time thinking about it. And a model that you can use for this, it's something we use, it's super simple. It's called macro, meta, micro. And so the macro is the big issue that's facing the world or facing the industry. A lot of times we'll line this up for very large associations with like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But there's a lot of issues that affect a lot of associations. So what's that big, huge question that people are trying to answer? Then there's a meta level to that. So your macro might be, let's say, your general session type content. And then the meta is, assuming you have different types of people with different backgrounds coming to your event, the meta is the opportunity for them to connect and talk to each other about whatever that macro issue is. And they're going to look at that macro issue through whatever lens they happen to, view the world through. So, if they're a scientist, or if there's someone who makes a product, or if there's someone even who sells a product, they're going to look at that issue a little bit differently. And the key is we want to get them to talk to each other about that. And then the micros and the macro, meta, micro, that's what would traditionally line up to, the breakout sessions that we have today, the very individualized specific content that they still need to move their career forward or to get credits or that type of thing. And so a really good example of this that I like to share is with an organization, the Institute for Food Technologists. So this is a group that's out of Chicago. And they have an event, and the event is called First. And so to give you a sense of like who these people are, so food technologists are like the people who make flavors. So like the coverings for Cheetos and that type of thing, and nutritional powders and that type of thing. So one side of their event is this scientific conference where people are publishing papers, and there are posters and, all of the sort of traditional things that you would see. And then the other side of their event, and it's almost like two co-located events, is a big trade show. And that's where like Pepsi and Mondelez and groups like those are the people who are walking the floor at the trade show because they want to buy the ingredients and the products and think about how to improve their products with whatever is coming out. And this has worked very well for IFT for many years, but they wanted to take their event to the next level. And so they started to frame their event around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so this is actually their theme from last year. So zero hunger, will we get there? And what they started to do was to actually source their papers and scientific topics around this question. So they took that question, the macro, they broke it up into different meta levels, and then they asked people to submit their papers and their presentations in ways that they were trying to answer these questions, as opposed to more of just like a topic-based approach. And then at the same time, this invited the supply side, the suppliers, to come in as well, because you can't solve this problem without the business side of things, right? So a really good example of this is, something with zero hunger is we need different sources of food. We need a lot of plant-based food if we're going to feed 10 billion people. If you want to have plant-based food, it's got to be one nutrition, I can't say that word. It has to have a lot of nutrition, but it also has to taste good. And it also has to be packaged well in a sustainable way that is affordable, and it has to be shipped to places. So, when you start to open it up like that, you can see how all the different types of business come together. And so this really invited a whole new industry side into their event that was really, really valuable. And so, another thing to talk about with this strategies, and I'm almost done here, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. But you want to think about, how do you set yourself up for success? How do you organize, yourself for success? And here's another screenshot opportunity. But one of the things that we use at 360 Live Media when we're designing events is what we call the 12 pillars. And so we look at an event through each one of these categories to make sure we really understand how it's performing, and is it meeting, what it needs to meet. And so the potential is, the best possible thing that this event could accomplish. It's the ultimate so what in the world. And then from that, next is the purpose. And it's, why are we actually holding this event? And are we fulfilling this potential in some way? Are we advancing the industry in some way? Then there's the people, that's who needs to be at this event to fulfill this purpose. Thinking about the positioning in the marketplace, how are we different than our competitors? Also thinking about the product itself, which is the event. We tend to refer to the event as the product because it is something that we are selling to people. The performance, what are our measures of success? And then of course, some of the details, right? The place, the price, the things that play back to those 10 hurdles. The packaging, what does the brand look like? Does it look like the type of event that we want it to be? Does it have good imagery that reflects the audience we want to attract? How are we promoting it? On what platforms are we promoting it? And on what platforms are we holding it if we're having anything virtual? And then of course, what partners we can bring to the table. And when we talk about partners, we mean more than just, like our exhibitors or our sponsors. Here we're thinking about partners that might even be sister societies or, adjacent businesses that could come in and help amplify and accelerate whatever it is you're trying to deliver. And then in terms of measuring the success, understanding what success looks like, we use this rubric we call the 6 R's. We like alliteration. We use a lot of P's and R's and things at 360. But scoremyevent.com, which you can see right there, that's a free tool that you can go to and get a grade for your event. And it's graded based on these 6 R's. So reach is the number of people that you bring to your event. And now we measure that both for in-person and digital, and we tend to have different goals for these. Retention is the number of people that come back year over year, but also how many people are we capturing from the digital space and bringing to the in-person. The relevance, we often will measure that with either a net promoter score, which is that, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend or colleague, as well as the amount of your membership that you attract to the event. So we work with a lot of organizations that put on events that they think are great, and they are great, but they only bring in 3 to 5% of their membership. So that means that it's not in line with what their membership wants. So it's a really interesting problem whenever we encounter that. The reputation is, how does it appear out in the marketplace? Again, we measure that with a net promoter score, but it's the external view. What do people think of it? And of course, the revenue is the amount of money that you bring in, and the ROI is the amount of money that you keep. Couple more things here to share with you. So One thing that I think has been really, really useful as we're in this time of uncertainty, and one strategy that we've used when we're trying to predict, what's going to happen. First is nobody knows what's going to happen, right? It's unpredictable. But what you can do is take a little bit of a different approach than maybe what you've done before. So I don't know about you, but for me, when I've set goals previously, it was, we need to get 175 people to this event. And that was what we are. And we either are there or we're not there. Well, in this time of uncertainty, it's almost like predicting like a hurricane, right? We have like the best case situation, which would be this green line that you see here. We have the worst case situation, which would be the blue line that you see. And then we have the most likely situation, which is that sort of pinkish line right in the middle. And so what that allows us to do when we're helping our clients is let them track success in, a more realistic way. So if you follow the purple line, so, the colored lines, those are the models, and then the purple line is the actual. And I've scrubbed this a little bit, but this is from an actual event last year. You can see that, the purple line sometimes was, right where, the right level was, sometimes it was below it. Fortunately, this one took off, and it actually beat the best case model. But the whole point was when we were in those conversations, at the very beginning and in the mid-August space, we were able to say to the client, and the client was able to say to all the people that they were reporting to that, hey, you know what? We might be below the model, the most likely, but we're right within that cone of where we thought we were going to be, overall. So we're still on track for where we want to be. So this is a great way to think about measuring in times of uncertainty. Another one that you can screenshot here, and I'll just spend a second talking through this, is this idea of organizational readiness. So we've worked, as I said, with more than 100 organizations, and we started to identify about 2 years ago that the people that we worked with who wanted a big change, a lot of times the work that we do is we go into an organization and we help them reinvent their event. So they just, either sunset an old event or they create a new one. The ones that were able to do that successfully were able to say yes to all of these questions, so these 10 questions. So it's things like, do we see the opportunity to increase our impact and the potential and the so what of our event? It's things like, we have a commitment to see things through a 3-year incubation cycle. It's especially this one about champions, and champions have to exist, on all levels. They have to be in the leadership, they have to be in the volunteers, they have to be in the staff side, because you need lots of people to drive change forward. And then also this idea that, you can commit to not doing things maybe that aren't driving you forward to your goal. So the ones that were able to make big change and impact, they did all of these things well. I'm just going to touch on this quickly. It's here because it's part of the strategies, and oftentimes I present a version of this to CEOs. And one of the things we talk about is staffing, right? And how you need to resource appropriately. And something that's not always recognized is that you need a much larger team to accomplish all of the things that you want to accomplish. If you are moving into the space of synchronous events and broadcasting everything at the same time, it takes a lot of work. But also these people need to work together to accomplish things. A lot of times, you've got an exhibits person who's maybe working over here and a marketing person who's maybe working over here, and then someone else is in charge of the content over here. It really has to be a team approach. Everybody has to work together, understand the goals, be accountable for the goals, know what the event wants to accomplish, know what the measures of success are. And so we recommend that groups work together to accomplish that. This is the big scary org chart that I like to put up for the CEOs that talks about, how many people do they need to hire to really, have a big, huge, successful event. And, I'm not going to dive in it too deeply, but, the takeaway from this is that it takes a lot of people to put on something where you have an in-person and a live broadcast digital component. I'm sure you all know that. You've lived this through the last couple of years. So this is just something that we use to reinforce that idea. This is actually an org chart we developed for one of our clients. And so we have, again, plenty of time for questions. So I'll bring the slides down in just a moment, once you've had the opportunity to catch this URL. We have a ton of free resources available. We put recordings and case studies and white papers and things here at this link. We have newsletters that we send out on occasion. So, if you're interested in seeing more or learning more, or just, understanding some of these thoughts behind our brain, that's where that is. And, as I sort of move into the questions here, I always like to end with this, idea that the only way to go forward is forward. We can't continue to look back and try to recreate what we had. We have to think about these strategies and moving forward with the future. And so been a real pleasure to talk with you all today. And that's my email address should you want to contact me with any questions afterwards. But as promised, I'll bring down the slides, and we have plenty of time for questions now. And I'll see what's here in the chat if there's anything I should respond to. Let's see here. Oh, good. I'm behind because I wasn't looking at the chat, but Pamela makes an excellent point about creating a business case for socializing. And if you have a show floor, an expo, or some type of business, side to your event, that's where the business case can really come in, right? I can tell you from a supply person, when I go to an event, one of the things I want is just to talk to as many people as possible. So that opportunity to socialize, and if you can measure it in some way, is great. And I see Stephanie responded to that. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that there. And then let's see. And the awards, I'm happy to dive into that as well. Awards are tough, right? I will. So my sort of like dirty little secret is that I hate awards shows. I never go to them because I think they're kind of boring, and I think that we don't do them as well as we could. Mm-hmm. For me, I would much rather see the recognition incorporated into the event. So things like, and these are small, silly things, but like, the dessert served is the awardee's favorite dessert. Not just put them on the stage for, 2 minutes to make maybe a speech and get a plaque, but how can you weave it through the event? Interviews that you can share. What are the lessons, that this person can give to the community? Like, I'd much rather interview some of these people or hear an interview with some of these people than just see them, wave at the stage and get their picture taken. It's very nice and I think valid, but it's that idea of creating the value for the whole audience, right? So, just a few thoughts there. But I'll stop talking because I'm talking a lot. There you go, Pamela. So questions or comments, or you can disagree with anything as well.
Well, I'll make a comment. I love the idea of weaving the question into either your theme or into your call for abstracts, because I think as we saw in that hierarchy of needs, right, finding a solution is at the top. And, we've heard from our attendees, and I'm sure some of our member associations have as well, is one of the top reasons for attending is to find those type of solutions and networking. So that was, I like that idea.
Yeah. I always say questions invite participation, right? And it also can do wonders for opening you up to new audiences. So, where somebody might read, let's say, a more scientific event, maybe feel intimidated that they can't join that conversation because they're not an expert in whatever space, they might have a lot of relevant things to contribute, though, to, zero hunger. So it's just a different way of thinking about things.
Yeah, definitely.
Other thoughts? Chat is fine too. I know this time of day can be difficult. Yeah. I can ramble on about just about anything. So feel free to ask about anything.
No, I think everybody they got your email. They were able to scan the QR code. So it doesn't seem like we have any more questions. Of course, you can always reach out to myself or Diane. You have Beth's email directly, but thank you for delivering this presentation, Beth. Of course, it was, we're glad that you could do that. And if there's nothing else for Beth, then I think we'll move on to the next part of the webinar. Here's another question.
Good question from Pamela. The cost impact will be for future events. Oh my goodness, this might be the most frequently asked question I get. So let's see if I can pull up the moment impact for you. So I'm gonna answer impact like in general, right? Because there's a lot of things to think about here. So first of all, you all have heard about inflation, and everything is costing a lot more than it used to, right? So upwards of 30 to 35% for food and beverage, for audio visual, so all those things, your dollar's not going as far as it used to. But remember, that has implications for both your attendees and your exhibitors. So on the exhibitor side, what we're seeing is, one, they had reduced budgets, to begin with, because they've had a few years, some of them with, much lower revenue. But two, it just costs them so much with drayage and if they're trying to ship something and all of that. So on the exhibitor side of things, thinking about, can you offer turnkey solutions for them? We've seen a trend where exhibitors are actually not necessarily wanting to be like in a booth or behind like a tabletop. They want like a little lounge where they could talk to people, like just, some chairs and a coffee table and that type of thing. So that could be a way that you can help your exhibitors with some of that cost. Now, then on the attendee side, same story, right? Budgets are smaller. It's a lot harder to get approval. And I don't know if you've tried to book a plane recently, but I have been blown away by the costs right now. So I see that next question, I'll definitely hit that. So overall, right now, it's just more expensive to hold an event. But I think there's some other sides of that to consider, right? So fewer people might come to events. I mean, again, nobody knows what's going to happen, but what we're seeing is that in the fall of last year, we were tracking at about 55% attendance of 2019 levels. In January, the reports that came out, 65% of 2019 levels. So it's sort of creeping back up. I just got back from an event myself where they were tracking at 80% of 2019 levels. So, maybe we'll have fewer attendees, which might reduce some of those costs. But, I think we have to think about what are all the no cost. I mean, I hate to use the word free, but what are all the no cost or low cost ways we can continue to up that value in the value equation? So the things like creating lots of opportunities for people to talk to each other, that problem solving can be a really high value opportunity on site. Even things like removing friction can provide, I can't think of the right word, a perception of increased value. So things like maybe you can't afford to give everybody coffee in the morning and serve breakfast, right? But you actually send them a note that says, hey, the best coffee shop in town is 2 blocks away. That way, make sure you get an oat milk latte or whatever it is. You don't have to buy it for them. You don't have to pay for them, but you're just telling them where to go and giving them a little bit of direction. They don't have to take the brain space to do that themselves. And so it increases their satisfaction and enjoyment. So things like that can help a lot. I hope that's a good answer to that question. And if you want more, Pamela, let me know. I'm going to move on to the next one here. So I have so many thoughts about hybrid, in-person, live, virtual. So let me just share a little bit of terminology so we're all speaking the same language here. So hybrid is not a thing. It is a logistics term in my thought of it. So nobody goes to a hybrid event. They go to an in-person event or they go to a digital event. Okay, so that's one thing to think about. In-person, is something that happens in person on site. Live means it happens at a scheduled time, whether it's physically in person or it's digital. And then virtual is something that happens through a screen. So just as you hear me talk, this is how I think about it. So I have shifted my opinion on this drastically since the start of last year. I will admit that at the beginning of last year, I was like, we can stream everything, just put a thing in the room and put it out and it'll be great and you don't have to worry about it. I don't agree with that anymore. There's a lot of different reasons for that. One is it's just a lot of effort and cost, but two, that's not necessarily what attendees want. So the thing to remember about live, in-person and digital is they do different jobs, right? And attendees have different expectations for what they're getting from them. So again, right now, the in-person is a lot more about that connection. Digital is really just about content. I want credits. I want, to hear whatever the session was. In terms of just some stats, because I was looking this up yesterday, right now, the average viewing time for on demand is somewhere between 15 to 29 minutes. So, if your session goes longer than 30, people are typically not consuming the whole thing. And for recorded sessions, people typically watch right up until the Q&A starts, and then they log off. So if you have like an hour session, 45 minutes is when Q&A starts. That's when they hop off. I think that a lot of organizations, and most organizations, don't have enough resources to do what I would call a synchronous event, where you're live streaming things out. If you think about it, the only organization I can think of, or the only event I can think of that really does this synchronous really well, is like sports, like the NFL, like the Super Bowl, right? So if you think about it, when you're there at the Super Bowl in person, you've got all the stuff happening, and there's the cheerleaders, and there's the food, and fun stuff, and you're right there, and you're not missing any of the details because they got the big screen up there and they're zooming in on the plays. And if you're watching it virtually, like at a bar or at home, you're getting you're still having a great experience because you're getting, the game, but you're getting the commentary and the little weird, they always have like the guys that like come on the screen and like, do the thing, and the stats at the bottom. So the takeaway there is that, the experience is specifically produced for that audience that's consuming it. If they just live streamed the football game with none of that commentary or none of that cool stuff, it would not be as appealing to watch as it currently is. And so most of us don't have that type of resources that the NFL, that's not even one group, right? That's like several different types of groups to put that together. So instead, the model that I really have come to love, and I'm seeing it more and more often, I'll let you know another stat from that January survey that came out. About 50% of events are releasing, let me say it better. Of the events that have digital content, about 50% of them are doing it post-show. And that's what I'm seeing with a lot of the groups that I'm working with. When they're having the event in person, they're focused on that. They're capturing content there, and then they're polishing it up and putting it online, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 weeks later. And then the people who attended the in-person event, they automatically get access to that digital content. And what's interesting, particularly in the scientific space, people like to rewatch content. Because they like to go back and they like to pick up, what was that stat or what was that thing that they said. They also like the opportunity to watch content that maybe they couldn't see in person. We see that much more in the scientific space. And in the digital space, it's not necessarily that they're expecting to consume every single thing that you have on site, but they are expecting something worthwhile. And I do think that's going to continue to shift as we go forward. I think that, for this year, people are still expecting a fairly robust, we'll call it, virtual schedule. But I think it will evolve into just stuff comes from the event and it goes into your online learning system. We all have online content of some way, shape, or form. So I hope that is a good answer. And again, I'm happy to dive a little bit deeper. Should anybody have any more questions on that? Ooh, how's that content?
How's content captured?
Very good question. Lots of different ways. So typically, you have to have a fairly large budget to even exactly think about live streaming, right? That's super expensive. If you are in the situation where you have like a big general session and you have like an iMag where, you put the screen behind you and sometimes people could see the speaker close. If you happen to have that, that can be easily captured and turned into your recorded or online content. But again, a lot of us don't have those resources. That's really like big, huge events. What we typically recommend is to pick a room on site to set up for recording, just one room. I see your question, Kim. So just one room. And then to the best of your ability, try to put what you think the most desirable sessions for the online audience will be in that room. And so you're just capturing that one room. Now it's hard to obviously know what people want. So that's where some of that data comes in, right? Like what were your most popular topics and popular sessions if you're able to schedule in that way. If you're not able to put everything in that room, there's two things you can think about doing. One is, if there's a session on site that's really good that for some reason you were unable to record, you could do an encore of it, have them come into the room and do the session again that you have set up for recording, or have them record it post-event. We all did that session recording, previously through Zoom and other things. So that's one thing you could do. Another thing you can do is do audio recordings. This is something that's really interesting that I've seen a few events do really, really well. Most of us have microphones already set up in our rooms. It's not that difficult to add an audio recording to that. You typically don't have to do too much to that. And then it's like you've got your podcast almost ready to go. So it's just another little bit lower cost way of thinking about it. Now, of course, with an audio recording, people aren't getting the slides and all of that. So, it might be better for like a panel session where a lot of people are talking as opposed to someone who's like showing lots of charts and graphs, but it's definitely a lower cost way to think about that. But it can be expensive. And so one of the things we always recommend is understanding the return on investment for that, right? And again, this is where being able to go back and look at your data will help, because it is different for every group. So, some groups maybe aren't consuming content online. And so, if you have found in the past 2 years that you aren't having people pick up on those recorded sessions, maybe you don't want to invest, in that content capture. I see Stephanie has her hand raised, and I definitely want to, that's another solution, Jane. Perfect. Yes, absolutely. To upload after the event.
Right.
Stephanie, do you want to say your thing?
I was just going to add another less expensive way. Now, a lot of times the labor is what really costs, right? You're paying for a technician to man that camera in the back of the room. Well, technology has advanced so much. They have cameras, autonomous cameras that they could just place in the back of the room that you don't need any technicians for. So if you're really interested in that, chat with your AV company to see if that's an option for them.
Yeah. You reminded me of one other thing that we'll sometimes do when we have no money. Sometimes we'll just ask the speakers, like right after the session or right before the session, to just like give us like 5 takeaways. And you can, again, record that like just with an iPhone. But it's not, you're not getting the whole presentation, but you're still getting like, a little bit of a blurb from them. And again, low cost. It's something that, like, if you have like an intern or a volunteer, particularly a younger generation person on your team, they're usually really good at that. And it's a great way to capture some additional content to put online. And so, Ken, your question is very broad, a few thoughts on changing attitudes and behaviors, but I'll do my best to just give you a few thoughts on it, because that's, the deeper dive in the presentation. And so, I think what's really interesting about it, first of all, is so people's values haven't changed, right? If I care about the world, I care about the environment, I care about my family, like I still care about all those things. I care about, being an ambitious person or my career, but the way that we approach things might be a little bit different. And so, I think the biggest impact that I have seen is actually around family. And, it lines up a lot with the return to work. So, everybody has, different policies. So I'm not sure, what world all of you are living in, but I'll use childcare just as one example. It used to be previously that it was fairly easy to get, childcare. At least there were models and structures for it. It was expensive. But, you put your child in daycare or with whoever, and then you came to the office. It's not that easy anymore. And it's for a lot of reasons. One, a lot of those places don't exist anymore. They couldn't stay open during that time period. But 2, if they have really young children, they're not vaccinated yet, and likely, so they're getting sick more often. And if they are going to a place, if there's a breakout, I've got nephews, and it's like every other week, it feels like, they're back at home, which is, been really difficult for my sister as she tries to go to work. So, there's that. There's also things like people are just sort of like, I know when I started getting on planes again, like it was harder for me to leave my dogs than it used to be. And, harder for me to leave my wife. And I'm someone who was on the road like every week, and it like, we didn't even think about it. Right. And then when it came time for me to like get on a plane again, we were like, wait a minute, like, where are you going and how long? And so like, some of it is that too. And this is where some of that like removing friction comes in again. At least for this year, and it depends on when your event is being held, but I'm talking to a lot of people who, their event is the first time that people are traveling, or the first time that people are like coming back to an event, and people kind of forgot how to do it. So all those little things like, know before you go, right? We always have know before you go, but we don't need to, put it all in one long email. Somebody just did like a know before you go, where they dripped it out over like 2 weeks. So it was like every Tuesday and Thursday, it was another piece of information. And in that way, they were able to highlight the really important things like their COVID safety protocols, but also like not overwhelm me with everything I needed, and also repeat things that they really wanted me to know, like pick up your badge at this time and you must have this. So, I think some of that can be helpful as well. I guess then, like, a final thing on attendee changing audience and human behavior that I think is really interesting is this idea that, after the past couple of years, we're actually in a moment where we're all sort of like rediscovering our identity. And some of the choices we're making are because we're trying to rediscover who we are and what we really care about. And so what we are seeing is that people are moving to like more experiential things because they need more stories to tell. They want to, encounter like escape rooms, like that type of stuff. Like people want to like experience things that, are more than just like, I don't know, a nice picture. They want to be like, I did this. Or I participate in this because I think it's important. Or even, I'm someone who goes to an event because it's important to me and my community to sit and talk about these things. So it's just interesting, and it's going to continue, to unfold, but we're still in this time of like, things are settling out, and we've got probably another year or even a little bit longer before we start to see some real true patterns. Well, I don't know how much time we have left, Stephanie, but
I think we've reached our time frame here, but I do want to thank everybody for joining us for this portion. Beth has shared a handout with Diane with some key takeaways from the presentation that Diane will share with you afterwards. So Beth, from the heart, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your meeting and the rest of your day. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Terrific. I'm sure that was just amazing. Stephanie, thank you so much. And Diane for bringing Beth on. That was highly relevant information and a lot to process there, but really, really good stuff. So for the second portion of our webinar, we are going to be talking about the new MA Code of Conduct Toolkit. And the connection to this webinar with conferences is there is a code of conduct for events. So, that's connecting here with what we're talking about today. And I have the honor of introducing Kathleen Waugh, who is going to speak to us about the Code of Conduct. Kathleen is WEF's Chief Operating Officer. She joined WEF in September 2020. Kathleen has experience in both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. Her experience spans finance, membership, advertising, and sales administration, customer service, IT, and chapter services, among others. She has an MBA from New York University and a JD from Arizona State University. While at Arizona State, Kathleen studied sustainability and utility law and did an externship at the Office of Environmental Enforcement at Arizona State University, at Arizona State Attorney General's office, where she interfaced with the Department of Environmental Quality on issues relating to air and water quality. So Kathleen, I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I've been with WEF about 1.5 years now, so I'm one of those people who joined an organization while we were almost entirely remote. So I've had the onboarding experience, which is mostly remote, and it's challenging. And I'm looking forward, now that the travel restrictions are loosening up, to being able to meet many of you, if not all of you, in person at some point over the next few years. And I will be in Fargo in June and look forward to meeting lots of new people. Again, really looking forward to the opportunity to connect with you in person. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. Let's see now. I've got it called up on my, there we go. Do you see it now, the code of conduct?
Yes, if you could.
Yes,
just
Kathleen, we do.
expand.
Okay, let me go to the slideshow view. I don't know if the slideshow view has come up or not. What are you seeing, Lisa?
We are seeing this, the slides on the side still. Yeah, I think you got it there. There you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
All
That
right.
looks great, Kathleen.
perfect. Thank you. Lisa, would you check the chat as we go through the presentation? And what I'd like to do, if there are questions, I'll take them at the end.
Very good.
So we've probably spent close to a year internally at WEF developing the code of conduct. It's really one of the first major projects I worked on after joining WEF, and was very involved with WEF's outside counsel, Barbara Dunn from Barnes and Thornburg, also working internally with Julia Eller, and certainly interfacing with the ethics subcommittee of WEF, and also talking to some of the stakeholders. So we're at the point now where we are rolling out the toolkit for the MAs. We had a call a week ago with the MA staff to kick this off. And then today I'm talking to the leadership of the MAs to make sure that you're informed. And if you have questions, you have the opportunity to reach out to me today or at any other time going forward. So I mentioned the road to the toolkit. It's been going on for like a year and a half now. The code of conduct has to interface with the member discipline policy. So we spent a lot of time developing the different policies and supporting procedures. We implemented the code toward the end of 2021. And one of the things that we did, which is very important, and I want to point this out for the MAs, is that we added acceptance of the code of conduct as part of the membership join and renewal process. Because people need to be informed that we expect members to uphold the code. That's an important part of the concept of due process. So the stage that we're currently in with the code is rolling it out to the MA so that you can update your policies and procedures as needed. So the purpose of the toolkit, I'm repeating myself a bit here. We wanted to make available the tools that we developed at WEF to make it easier for the MA. If you chose to follow our policies and procedures, you could adopt the templates. If there's something that you want to change, you certainly have that prerogative. One of the key things I want to talk about today is to clarify the jurisdictional issues. And this is the question of who has authority when misconduct occurs. So I'll be talking a bit about when the WEF member code of conduct applies, when the MA code of conduct would apply, and also talk about the interaction with the codes of conduct and interaction with an event code of conduct. The fact that we're a federation and that we have events that are occurring all over the country, some sponsored by the MA, some sponsored by WEF, it does create some questions about what applies when. But before I get into those granular details, I wanted to pull up a minute and just remind ourselves, why are we doing this? And the reason we're doing this is that a code of conduct is a tool that can help ensure for everyone who's a part of WEF or who attends a WEF event, that the environment at WEF or at the MA is professional, safe, and welcoming for all. So that's the ultimate goal. Now I'd like to jump into some of the granularity around the jurisdictional issues created with our federation structure. So the question, who has authority to handle a dispute or a complaint? Well, it depends on whether the member is a member of the MA only, or if the member is a member of both WEF and the MA. And I want to point out that the WEF member code of conduct is primary authority in the case of a member who is a member of both WEF and the MA. However, the MA could have an MA specific code of conduct for members that is in addition to or as a supplement to the WEF code. Now, this is optional. The MA can make the MA's own decision about whether or not you choose to adapt the tenets of the WEF code, or if you would prefer to do something else that would be in addition to or as a supplement to the WEF member code of conduct. So I've already covered that first idea here, and I'd like to drop down to now the instance when an MA has MA only members. It's really important that the MA have an MA specific member code of conduct for their members who are MA only members and not a member of WEF, because the WEF member code of conduct does not apply in that instance. An MA only member is not a member of WEF. So in the toolkit, you'll see this grid. It's pretty, I think, useful distilling of when the code is applicable. And there are multiple codes that we're talking about. We're talking about the WEF member code of conduct that clearly applies when someone is a WEF or an MA member. It does not apply if someone is the member of a MA only, and a WEF member code of conduct would not apply to someone who is a non-member. So if the MA has an MA specific member code of conduct, it would apply in the event someone is a member of WEF and the MA, but would not apply to a non-member. The important thing to realize is that we also have event codes of conduct, and that is tied to registration. When someone registers to attend WEF Tech or to attend an MA conference, that would apply in every instance, whether or not the participant is a WEF MA member, is a MA only member, or is a non-member. The event code always applies. In the toolkit, you'll also see this flow chart. The important thing to key in on here is where the misconduct occurs, and is the complainant, is the person being complained about a WEF member or a member of the MA only. And I won't go through the different flow charts here, but it is in the toolkit for future reference. Okay, what are some suggested next steps? Well, the first thing to do is really chart the landscape for your MA. Do you have WEF MA members? And do you have MA only members? Look at any existing codes of conduct and event codes of conduct that you may have, and also pull out the established conduct and disciplinary procedures. We suggest looking at the templates that we have provided. Look at what you already have in place and decide whether or not you want to update what you currently have, whether you would want to adopt WEF's code for your members who are members of both WEF and the MA. And you'll see the second dash here, that's an important step. We provided these templates that have been approved by WEF's outside counsel, but in the case of the MA, it's important for you to consult outside counsel as well, because the template is only a template. and it needs to work in concert with policies and procedures that you put in place at the MA. And your procedures may be different than what WEF has in place. That's very important. You know, the idea of due process provides protection for the person who has suffered the effects of misconduct. It's also important for the person who is alleged to have done the misconduct. We want to protect the rights of all and make sure that everyone is heard. Next, you should think about whether or not your bylaws need to change. It's quite possible your bylaws don't need to change, particularly if your bylaws already make reference to the MA's ability to terminate membership for misconduct. Generally, it's suggested that bylaws be very broad and so rather general in scope so that you don't have to change them every time an MA or WEF adopts a new policy or procedure. So ideally, bylaws would reference your policies and procedures, and your policies and procedures should have some information about misconduct and when a member's rights may be terminated. But you don't have to spell out that procedure in your bylaws. The bylaws simply should reference that the MA or WEF has those procedures and policies in place. Well, I already touched on the idea of informed acceptance. This is what we have in place at WEF when a member wants to join or renew. There is a checkbox where you are acknowledging that you agree to uphold the code of conduct as part of being a member of WEF. And lastly, it's important to communicate to your members that yes, we have this code of conduct in place. And yes, the reason why we have it in place is because we want to create a safe, welcoming environment for all. And this means that we are asking our members to uphold certain standards of ethics and behavior, and those are embodied in the code of conduct. And these are the appropriate and relevant policies and procedures that support the process by which a complaint may be filed, investigated, and resolved. So that's kind of a crash course in the toolkit. And I'd like to open it now for any questions.
Thanks, Kathleen. That was great, really helpful. So we invite questions either in the chat or you can unmute your mic and ask a question about the code in general or the code as it applies to an event, conference, in-person event that you're having. Does anyone?
That was me responding. So
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that, Lisa.
That's okay. Is there any MA right now who has a code of conduct connected to an event already?
Yeah, hi, this is Lou from the Illinois Water Environment Association. We do have a code of conduct for all of our, like a general one for all events. So it's not really specifically tied to one event, but it's for any event that we're having. It was put in place, I think, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, primarily for the conference, but it does cover all in-person events.
Very good. Any experience with that you'd like to share? How that has been received or how effective that is, or?
Yeah, I haven't heard any comments one way or the other on that. I believe it went in place just before the pandemic started, so I don't know that we've had any experience with it so far. But we do review it with MAs or with with WEF's policy to make sure that we're in line with it occasionally. I think actually a few weeks ago, we were just looking at WEF's policy to make sure that our policy was kind of matches as close as possible. And then it also identifies any of the things we need to identify.
Good. Thank you, Lou. That's helpful. And we have a few comments in chat. Debbie Lewis is asking if this has already been rolled out to MA staff, and do we need to do anything as HOD members?
Let's see. I'm sorry, where? I was in the chat, so I was distracted when you were talking, Lisa.
Oh, that's okay. Debbie is asking if this has already been rolled out to MA staff, and
Yes.
yes, Debbie, we did that a week or so ago. And do we need to do anything as HOD members? We actually have this as a topic, I believe, coming up at a house session. So that is to come.
Yes.
And then Angie is asking, well, no, she's saying she has to jump to another call. Pam is asking, is saying that Georgia has a code of conduct for interactions and events. So there's another MA with a code of conduct. And Jane is asking, can an MA simply incorporate the WEF code by reference if it aligns with their PNP?
The answer to that is yes. Unless you have MA only members, you also have to have an MA specific code of conduct, because for the MA only members, they are not governed by the WEF code because they are not members of WEF. That's the jurisdictional complexity created by our federation structure.
Good. So Jane, please pipe in if you have a follow-up question to that, or unmute your mic. Happy to discuss that further. And it looks like NUIA has a basic one for events as well. So there's another MA with a code of conduct in place. Karen is asking, is this for all events? Our large event is with 2 other associations. How are other associations implementing this with events? Janice, I'm wondering if you want to speak to that, or Lou, would you like to talk some more about that? And Georgia have experience.
This is Lou. Our main conference is done with another organization here in Illinois called the, I don't know butcher their name, the Illinois, basically the Operators Association for Illinois. And they, when we put the plan in place, we developed it first, and then we ratified it in our group, and then we presented it to them. We were doing the joint conference, saying that we have this policy. Would you like to develop a new policy for the specific conference that at least meets this? Or do you have your own policy that you'd like to put in place? And basically, they just adopted the same policy that RMA put together for the conference. And so far, it seems to be good for both groups.
Good, thank you. So I'm looking at the time. Thank you for these questions. They're really helpful to having us all understand. And please know at any time, after this webinar, and as you look at the materials on code of conduct, don't hesitate to reach out to Kathleen, me, Diane, talk about any of this further, and also the other MAs on the call that have experience with this. So Kathleen, thank you so much for your time coming on the call today and sharing.
Happy to be here.
Good. Diane, over to you.
Sure, thank you. I want to thank everybody for taking their time to be with us here today. We learned through our conversation today that flexibility is key to success in event management. Change is the constant, and no matter how hard you plan, if you keep an open mind and your focus on the attendees, then you will own the success. I want to remind people the next leadership series is scheduled for June 30th, and that will be all about emerging leaders, same time, 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. And I just will give you a little food for thought until we meet again. If you are not learning and growing, you are standing still. Look for information that builds on what you know and fills in the gaps that we don't know. We look for the leadership series to help us grow, share, and fill in some of those gaps. So until then, see you in June. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Nice to see everyone.